Wonderful. So welcome everyone. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've been a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association for going on 30 years now. And so I've served a number of roles, including that of community educator. And, I'll point this out also at the end of our time together. But the goal of the Alzheimer's Association, regardless of where you live in the country, is to always have a place where you can go to, pick up the phone, and get a voice of a real person on the other end to help you at whatever stage of the process you're at. Whether you are a paid employee and a formal caregiver in a variety of care settings, whether that's home health or residential care, whether you're a family member, whether you're someone who, as you age, has questions about your own brain health and what healthy brain functioning should look like for you, and or if you're at a point where you're overwhelmed with a variety of needs and concerns and you don't know where to start. And oftentimes, talking to a real person about the details of your situation can then help them sort of say, well, if everything's going on, here's a really nice way to start. So I'll make that point also at the end of our time and make sure that all of you have that 1-800 number for the Alzheimer's Association where you can call 24/7. Right? So around the clock, 3:30 in the morning, you can always pick up the phone and talk with a real person. So the goal of today's presentation is going to be talking about the early phases of Alzheimer's and 10 warning signs. And all of us are aging, right? And all of us have questions about what does healthy brain functioning look like as we age. I oftentimes tell people that Alzheimer's now is what cancer was like 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. I can remember my own grandmother growing up during a time at which cancer didn't feel like it was treatable. There weren't really good diagnostic procedures other than to put someone into surgery and open them up and see what was there. And she had a fear that she had cancer and wouldn't talk about it with anyone, wouldn't share that issue with family, wouldn't share it with friends, wouldn't share it with her doctor because she had a lot of fear of it. I think that's where we're at, unfortunately, in a lot of parts of our society when we talk about the differences between healthy brain functioning, all of the other conditions that can cause some changes in brain health, some changes in memory and thinking, and then when we go into that world of neurocognitive disorders like Alzheimer's. So the purpose of the hour that we have today is for me to walk through some of those 10 warning signs. And you may find that of interest for yourself in your own brain health and your own aging processes. You may be in a situation where you have some questions or concerns for a family member or friend, or you may be a professional who has contact both with individuals later on in the phases of dementia, but also with family members who have questions about things at the earlier stage. So with that, we'll get started. I'd really like to warmly invite you to use the chat. I will be checking on chat questions throughout our time since in this webinar platform, right, your audio and your video isn't shared. We don't have the ability for you to verbally ask your questions, but all of you have the ability, if you're using a device other than calling in with your phone, to be able to type in questions, and I'll try to respond to those as we go. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started, and now, here we go. It's just loading up. So today we're going to talk, in the hour that we have, we're going to talk about some really common age-related memory, thinking, and behavior changes. Our goal is that all of you can then begin to be able to recognize common warning signs to Alzheimer's and other forms of neurocognitive disorders, and whether we're formal professionals or whether we're a family member, we'd like to have some tips for how to approach somebody when there are memory concerns. We're especially emphasizing the role of early detection and the benefits of a formal diagnosis and helping folks understand what those tests and processes are that are involved in the diagnostic process. And then, as I indicated, we're going to be ending to make sure that you're aware of all the resources that are available through the Alzheimer's Association. So we're going to start with a case study of a family and you see here that we're going to be talking about Mary, who's a 73-year-old widow. She's a retired teacher. She has always kept a very clean, very organized house, and she has 2 daughters. We're going to start by hearing about Lydia, and then we're later on going to hear from one of her other daughters. But her daughter, who lives closest by, has really been noticing some changes, and she's not really sure what's going on. So she's seeing laundry pile up, junk mail, newspapers, bills stuck in with other things. And that just, so Lydia's thought is like, that just isn't my mom. What's going on here? So here you're going to see a text between Lydia and her sister saying, I'm worried about mom. She keeps losing things and the house is a mess. And her sister says, well, it's probably normal to get a little forgetful for her age, right? And then Lydia says, well, I don't know. This is so unlike her. Should we be worrying? And then the sister says, well, how about if we check in with our neighbor, Dr. Soloway? So now we're going to hear from a doctor's perspective.
As we get older, cognitive problems become more noticeable for almost everybody, and it can vary from person to person. Typically with age, people have trouble coming up with the word they want right when they want it. They have trouble remembering names, and they don't think quite as quickly. What's more concerning, or what might be the beginning of a memory problem, is people have a lot of trouble coming up with words or names, and it's happening more frequently, and the words or names don't necessarily come to them later. And then they start misplacing things, but not just once in a while, because we all misplace things, but more often. And it begins to interfere day to day. That should be a warning sign for people that this might be the beginning of a memory problem.
And we'll continue with this discussion along the road. And so it's not that from every once in a while one of these warning signs shows up, but that there's really an ongoing consistent pattern. All of us get stressed, all of us get forgetful and scattered. I have opened up my cabinet and found my milk next to my cereal. Thought, what in the world did I do there? I have lost my keys, but usually we find the way of backtracking. So now we're going to walk through some of the most common 10 warning signs to give you some concrete examples. We're going to start by talking about and differentiating between dementia and Alzheimer's disease.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow and the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
And so you're going to hear, depending upon the setting that you're in, you're going to still hear the word dementia used a lot. And sometimes you're going to hear the newer phrase neurocognitive disorder. And that is the more medical term that's really identical to what we've been using when we use the term dementia. So now let's learn a little bit specifically about Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common form of dementia.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alice Alzheimer's described specific changes in the brain, what we call the formation of plaques and tangles. Now, Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and is thought to impact memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has 3 main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. The cerebrum fills up most of your skull. It is part of the brain most involved in remembering, problem solving, thinking, and even feelings. There are about 100 billion nerve cells or neurons throughout the brain that transmit messages in order for us to create memories, feelings, and thoughts. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to the brain tissue loss, or what we call shrinkage, and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, such as memory loss, problems with thinking, planning, behavioral issues, and even at the end stages, problems with swallowing.
So it's so important for so many individuals and families to really understand that Alzheimer's is a brain disease and it's impacting the whole brain over time, but really starts in specific centers, and that when we look at the brains of individuals who are going through healthy cognitive aging and Alzheimer's, those brains look very, very different. And sometimes for family members who struggle with, well, why is my family member acting that way? Sometimes me like pulling up a picture or printing out a picture from a computer that shows the comparison of those two brains really allows that, oh, this is really a brain disease in which the brain is getting really impacted.
It's important to know what the warning signs of Alzheimer's are and to be on the lookout. We know that we change over time, and the warning signs of Alzheimer's can be warning signs of a number of things, but when you see those in yourself or in someone you care about, it's important to check it out, to consult with a doctor, to find out what you're dealing with.
So now we're going to walk through some more details on these 10 warning signs, and we're going to have some examples, and I'll add in but certainly as you are hearing this information, if you have additional questions, and you have the ability, you're using a device where you can type in, don't hesitate to type in questions as we go through, because I'll be monitoring those and responding to those as well. So now we're going to be talking first and foremost about memory loss, right? Because that's something that people so commonly think of, that when they think of Alzheimer's, they think of forgetting recently learned information. But there's other ways and other things that we forget. So we can forget important dates or events. We can forget that we've had a conversation and asked the same question over and over again. If you see, for all of us who are going through healthy aging, right? I'm in my late 50s, and I am trying to use good memory aids for me. So notes and reminder cards are good for all of us to use. But if somebody is increasingly really relying on family members to remind them of things that they just used to be able to manage all the time on their own, that would be a sign of a warning sign. So a really typical age-related change is sometimes forgetting names or appointments, but remembering them later on. That grocery store, I run into a neighbor, I see the face, I know I should know the name. Oh my goodness, I can't remember the name. I'm a little embarrassed. I do some chit chat, and then I leave the grocery store and I'm driving home. And it's like, Mark, that was Mark, oh my goodness. So that kind of forgetting something, then remembering it later on is really normal age-related compared to more consistent memory changes. So the second change that we're going to be talking about is challenges in planning and problem solving. And so that impacts, that reflects what our frontal lobes, what the front part of our brains do for us. And some individuals experience changes in their ability to develop and follow a plan or work with numbers. So that can be trouble following a really, really familiar recipe. You know, this is the old standby. I haven't needed to look at a printed recipe for this. We've been making this the same way all our lives. All of a sudden, I'm really struggling with that recipe. Keeping track of monthly bills. And my dad, we got a bill back from the company, thanks to them, in which he had written the dollar amount up in the date and he had written who the bill was going to in the signature, and it was just like all confused. And this is someone who had spent a lot of his work managing numbers and managing accounts. And also sometimes possible signs of dementia can be real difficulty concentrating and taking much longer to complete a task. So typically for all of us, as we all age, a really normal age-related change is sometimes making errors in managing finances or household bills. And so now we're going to listen on a sign for one specific individual.
I was probably spending 4 to 5 times more time preparing for something than I did, say, 5 or 10 years ago, because of I would lose my thought, I'd lose my focus, I'd get anxious, I wouldn't get to sleep. I was thinking I was in my sleep, I was thinking about what I was anxious about, which was I was trying to remember, which was I was trying to prepare, which I was trying to do. So it was really a vicious circle so I was able to control it a lot, so that people wouldn't see things, and there weren't things to be seen. It's what was disturbing me was what effort I had to put into to do the things I used to do more easily.
And so you're going to excuse me while I dropped my mouse. In that situation, John had been diagnosed with Lewy body disease. So now we're going to talk about difficulty completing familiar tasks. And I'd already kind of given the example of the recipe. And so people who have a dementia run into difficulty completing things that are really, really familiar. So driving to and from the grocery store that has been the same grocery store that's just a couple of blocks away and next to the church that they've been going to for 50 years, and then all of a sudden they get lost on the way home, and that's so unusual. So organizing a grocery list, which is somebody's been doing their whole time, remembering the rules of a favorite game that they frequently played. So commonly for all of us, normal age-related changes are occasionally needing help with complicated things, settings on a microwave, or to record a TV show, or, oh my goodness, I've got 5 remote controls, and how come I can't figure out which one is going to mute the TV right now because we're using the computer speakers or something like that. So here we're going to hear from an expert.
Some people have difficulty with math or with reading in a way that's unusual to them. And once again, this is a change in that person. So for example, we all know somebody who was never able to balance their checkbook, right? So that wouldn't be a warning sign for them. But if somebody who always balanced their checkbook to the penny suddenly was paying bills, the same bill over and over, and not able to balance their finances, well, that would be a sign for them.
So it's really the change that you're hearing Melissa emphasize. It's really the change from previous functioning that's so important. So sign 4 that we're talking about next is confusion with time and place. And so people who are living with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia can lose track of dates, seasons, and the passage of time. They may have trouble understanding something if it's not happening immediately. So if I am having a conversation with my father who has vascular dementia, and it's Tuesday, and I'm talking about a doctor's appointment that we're going to go on together on Friday, and all of a sudden he's like getting his shoes to get ready to go, and he's like, no, okay, I'm ready, and she's like, no, Dad, that's going to be Friday, that's not right now. So they can kind of like have, so sometimes if we're working with individuals who do already have dementia, really thinking about the time, the correct time to alert them as to what's going to happen next. And I may do a little bit less advance notice, and I may call him the night before to remind him that I'm going to be picking him up from his memory care unit the next day, but that he doesn't have to worry. I'm going to be there, and I'll call and remind him. And then, I might remind the staff when we're going to go. And then I might call him on my way over and say, hi, Dad. Remember, we're going to go see we're going to the dentist with you, and I'm going to be over in about 15 minutes. And you don't have to do anything. They're going to help you get ready. And then when we get there, we'll be ready to go. So a typical age-related change for all of us as we get older is sometimes getting confused about the day of the week. What's the date? Or for me, my days can be busy enough. It's like, oh my goodness, is today Tuesday or Wednesday? I've been pretending like it's Wednesday, but it's really only Tuesday. So, but then, we figure it out later on. So again, we're looking for consistency of problems as opposed to this problem showing up at any one time. So an area of dementia that people think about less frequently than they think about these things that we've already talked about that are kind of like more memory related and more problem solve related is trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. Our brains organize our world for us, and there are parts of our brain that are involved in perception, in both depth perception and me being able to interpret what it is that I'm seeing. And so for some people, vision problems can be a sign of dementia. And it doesn't mean that they're having changes in their in the acuity of their eyes. It's not an eye change, it's a brain change in the center that's interpreting those visual images. So that can lead to a number of things. That can lead to trouble with balance. It can lead to people struggling with reading. It can create problems with people judging distance or color or contrast, which can cause issues with driving, certainly, but sometimes also for individuals in eating and kind of recognizing what's on the plate. So the ways that we work with individuals who do have a diagnosed neurocognitive disorder is really helping to create cues to help individuals interpret the environment. So a pretty age-related change that's common for many people are vision changes that are related to cataracts, for example. And now we're going to hear.
Alzheimer's disease is not just a disease of memory. It can affect other things too. It can affect the way that we perceive what we see. So sometimes somebody in the early stages of Alzheimer's might go to the eye doctor because they're having trouble seeing, and in fact their vision is just fine, but the way they're perceiving what they're seeing may be difficult.
And I think that that's something important for us to keep in mind of. Okay, so now we're on 6 of 10. And another sign or warning sign of Alzheimer's and other dementias is new problems. Again, we're looking for a change from what's been common in the past. So new problems with words, with speaking or writing. So people with Alzheimer's may have trouble following or joining a conversation. They really may get lost, so stop in the middle of a conversation and not know how to continue. They may repeat themselves. They may struggle with vocabulary. My father, again, with dementia, may pick up, like, well, he doesn't have a cell phone anymore, but may have his phone, may pick up my phone and say, this box thingy, this talking control thing, and he's like just lost the word for phone. And difficulty naming a familiar object or using the wrong name. I early on, when he began not being able, he was holding on to his checkbook. And again, this is someone who spent a lot of his time with accounts and managed all the family bills, and he couldn't come up with the name of checkbook. And it wasn't just a little blurt of, oh, I'm struggling here, but consistently he just started talking around it. So sometimes it's common for all of us to have trouble finding the right words. And that's a typical sign of aging. So now we're going to hear a little bit about a sign for another individual who was diagnosed with a dementia.
The other thing that I've increasingly been struggling with are words.
And Phil has Alzheimer's.
I've dealt with words my entire life, as an avid reader, as a reporter, as a writer. I struggle with them now.
Yeah. And so we're also going to talk about something that many of you may be familiar with, which is a warning sign of someone misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace the steps. So a person who's living with Alzheimer's or another dementia may put things in unusual places. They may lose things and not be able to go back to the steps to find them. They may accuse other people of stealing. and that occurs more frequently over time. So for all of us, really, really normal age-related changes are misplacing things from time to time. Oh my goodness, I can't find my keys. I can't find my phone. It's dark and it's up against a dark surface. Where was I the last time I had it? Oh my goodness, that's right. I actually had it in the holder of my car, and I left the car and went into the house that night and left my phone in the car. So I had to think to retrace my steps. Most of the time, most of us can misplace things from time to time, but eventually we'll be able to retrace steps and find them. And that wouldn't be the case with someone who's experiencing a neurocognitive disorder or dementia. So another important, remember before I was talking about frontal lobes, and that with Alzheimer's, the variety of parts of our brains change. We have cell death, and it starts in some parts of the brain that are really commonly involved in memory, but then it moves into parts of the brain that help with our language centers, with interpreting our vision, with problem solving. And our frontal lobes are really involved in just like good judgment. And so people who are living with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia may experience really changes in their judgment or decision making. They may use really poor judgment when dealing with money. They may pay less attention to grooming or keeping themselves clean. They may start acting a little bit more rudely in terms of that social judgment and those social rules than would be typical for them. So all of us have the right to make bad decisions from time to time, and I am no exception to this. So all of us, in terms of our own aging, are once in a while going to be making mistakes or making bad decisions, like neglecting to change the oil in the car, or ignoring something that really needed to be attended to. So now we're going to listen on a sign for somebody else named Teresa.
The way I kept my house, I wouldn't say I was OCD, but pretty close to it. And all of a sudden, everything was okay with me. It's like, oh, it's a pile, I'm tired. So my dining room table usually looked like it was someone's office, because I always would say I would do it tomorrow. And then my bedroom, as far as clothing, I would just put it in a corner, put it in a chair. And all of this is just, I wouldn't say it looked like I was a pet wreck, but really I was, because I never threw anything away. I always would say, I'll get to it, but I never did get to it. So just the way of my standard of living, it was actually decreasing.
So now we're getting close to the end of our 10 warning signs, and the ninth one is withdrawal from work or social activity. So somebody who's living with dementia or Alzheimer's disease may experience changes in the ability to hold or follow a conversation, and as a result, they may end up withdrawing from social activities, from hobbies, from other engagements. They may have trouble keeping up with a favorite sport that they used to always enjoy. So typically for all of us as we age, there might be times where we feel uninterested in family or social engagements, but that ebbs and flows.
One of the most common changes, and early on, is the person's comfort zone shrinks a little bit, and then that gets worse throughout the course of the illness. So they're less comfortable going out, they're less motivated to do things than they were in the past. So there's some change in day-to-day functioning that way. I think people also lose confidence in their cognitive abilities, because they may not recognize someone or know their name or find the right word, and they'll feel awkward, and they don't want people to notice that, so they feel more comfortable at home or in situations with family where they're very, very comfortable with that wouldn't concern them. So people tend to withdraw a little bit and be less outgoing. That's can be one of the early signs of Alzheimer's.
And the last of the signs that we're going to be talking about are changes in mood and personality. So people who are living with dementia may experience mood and personality changes. They may become suspicious, confused, depressed, fearful, anxious. They can get more easily upset at home with friends or when they're out of their comfort zone. So typically for all of us, we have ways that we like to do things and we have routines. And so it's common for all of us as we age that we have developed specific ways of doing things, and we kind of can become irritable when our routine's disrupted. But this is far more dramatic and far more noticeable as somebody's living with dementia.
Another early sign of Alzheimer's or dementia is subtle changes in behavior. So all of a sudden, the family may notice the person is more easily irritated, or more impatient, or a little moody, or have a shorter fuse, or more anxious. Now, there's lots of things that can cause that, but often that can be an early symptom of Alzheimer's or go along with the early symptoms of memory loss.
So now as we work our way back beyond these 10 warning signs, again, you're all welcome to type in questions as we then move into next. And I'd like to point out that some of those clips that we heard from as we went through these 10 warning signs were with real individuals who are living with either Alzheimer's disease, with dementia, with Lewy bodies. And you could note that many of them were very, very early stage, right? They were still very articulate. They were still very, very conversant. They're still able to express themselves. And one of the dramatic changes that has happened in the past few decades has been our ability to identify Alzheimer's and other dementias really early on and not wait till late stage before it become diagnosed. So now we're going to return back to our family, the Garcias, and really interpreting the signs and deciding on our next steps. So now we've got the cell phone. Did you look at those warning signs info that I sent? And the sister said, yes, I did, but I don't know. Mom's showing a couple of signs, but not all the time. How do we know if it's serious enough to see a doctor? And Lydia says, well, let's check with Dr. Salloway again.
Memory is not all or none, especially when there are early symptoms or signs. So on a good day, people might function very well and not really even, no one notices there's a memory problem. But on other days, especially if they're tired, then things become more noticeable. So memory is variable. It's not all or none. And then there are different type of symptoms that develop for each person. So some people may have trouble with language, may have trouble with organizing themselves, may have trouble navigating while driving, and other people don't have the same symptoms. So you don't have to have every symptom of Alzheimer's to be concerned. And I think the most important thing is determining what has changed from that person's normal level of functioning. And usually people have a pretty keen sense of, what they can normally do well. And then when either they or the family notice that there has been some change from that usual pattern of functioning, that should be a warning sign to people. But they don't have to check off all the boxes.
So Lexi's asked a really good question, and we're going to get to that. So our little recap of our 10 signs is that we've got these 10 signs. They're just a guide to identify problems. Individuals may experience one or multiple in various degrees. They don't have to have all of them for there to be a concern. That if you notice signs in yourself or someone else, it's important to see a doctor. So Lexi asked the question, well, what tips do you have for addressing, helping an individual who is living independently, but with perhaps minimal family involvement, but who's presenting with some signs of Alzheimer's? So Lexi, we're going to go through some of those general tips, and it commonly involves ways of broaching the topic with them. And I'm going to sort of point out that our favorite phrase that we use is brain health, as opposed to cognitive problems or memory and thinking problems, because we're all used to thinking about our physical health. We're increasingly aware of and increasingly more comfortable talking about our mental health, and our brains are a part of our body too. And so we're now going to walk through some tips on how to have some of those early conversations. So we'd like to make a case for why early detection can be so helpful and so important.
It's a very interesting phenomena that people who have memory problems are often less aware of it than family members or their friends who know them well. One of the reasons for that is our ability to monitor ourselves, which is an important part of brain function, decreases when we start having memory problems. Not in everybody, but commonly, and more than half the people with memory problems. And so the person is just not keeping track of the trouble they're having day to day. But the family members are, paying attention. If they're paying attention, they see, boy, this is starting to happen a lot, and the person's not aware of it. So the family's more aware, and they may talk to their loved one about it, and they say, I've noticed you've been repeating yourself. And they say, I'm not repeating myself. And that could either be due to the fact that they're not aware of it, or they may not want to acknowledge it.
And so, Dr. Soloway gave the experience of, family and friends are often the first to notice changes. And then certainly for those of you who are staff in senior living communities, it might be a staff member who's one of the first individuals to notice some changes.
I was so adamant about what was happening to Daryl. I wasn't sure. I didn't know.
So this is Mary as a partner.
This wasn't the person that I know. This wasn't the person. Daryl was my husband was very, he always had to be building or designing or working with his hands. And it was getting to the point where he wasn't, and he was becoming very frustrated when he was forgetting to do things or go places.
Okay, now here we go. So now we're going to be talking through this 10 steps for approaching the memory concerns. So first, we're going to be assessing the situation and really be thinking, okay, so can I list what are the changes in memory, thinking, or behavior that I see in this other individual? Then two, what else is going on? Are there some other pieces of the puzzle that can explain why there are difficulties? Certainly we know that individuals who may be struggling with depression can have common concentration difficulties. So somebody has already identified that they're under treatment for depression. That concentration makes it harder for things to then get stored into long-term memory. Or someone's recently bereaved. I can say certainly, during the months where my mother was in hospice, and then shortly after her death, I was very scattered and I had difficulty concentrating. And that difficulty concentrating is a normal part of grief reactions for all of us. So we need to think about what's the context for some of these changes that we're seeing. And then, what all of you are doing today and learning about the science and the benefits of an early diagnosis can really be helpful. And then checking in for those who have other contact with the individual. Has anyone else been noticing the changes? Now we're going to talk, Lexi, about how to have that conversation. What are some ways that I can respectfully and gently approach an individual and help move us farther along in the process of detection? So, we oftentimes need to figure out who's the best person to have the conversation to discuss concerns. Depending upon who's involved in that person's social sphere, there might be someone who has a little bit stronger of a relationship than someone else, or has a little bit better of a working relationship, and that might be the individual to approach. So sometimes within family, within friends, or within residential care settings, it's kind of like a team effort of deciding who the best person to have the initial conversations. And then thinking what's the best time and place to have the conversation? We want to make sure that it's a time where they can focus, where we're not going to be interrupted, where there's not a lot of outside noises or distractions that make it hard to have the conversation. And then what will you or the person having the conversation say? As we go through, I'm going to be making some recommendations for some specific phrases that can be useful ways of starting. And then it can be very helpful, again, when the situation allows itself to offer to go with the person to the doctor, or to help find someone else who could go with them to the doctor. So, again, depending upon the settings that the individual is living in and what's possible in their settings, really having that offer of you don't have to do this alone can be very, very useful. And then this as needed, have multiple conversations. I'd like to encourage all of us to think that this is never a single conversation. And that's true for life. That's true when we express concerns about anyone for any concern, that this is a process and that I have an expectation that we may be having a series of conversations over time and make a little bit more headway each way. So to not put too many eggs in a single conversation basket. We're doing this intervention and then we're going to get this taken care of, but it might need to happen over time. And then certainly reaching out for support from the Alzheimer's Association can be useful. And I'll be providing the phone number for the Alzheimer's Association and encouraging all of you, whether you're someone who has concerns about your own brain health, whether it's concerns about a family member or friend, a member of your chosen family, like a neighbor or a past worker, or if it's someone who you have contact with in your work environment. And so now we're going to be talking about this important part of seeing a doctor. And most of the time, the starting off point is going to be the individual's primary care physician. So most people address concerns about memory, thinking, or behavior first with their primary care physician. And for individuals who are Medicare approved, who've been a Medicare recipient for at least 1 year, they're all qualified for an annual Medicare annual wellness visit. And built into that Medicare annual wellness visit is a cognitive screen. Some primary care physicians will always do the cognitive screen as a part of that annual wellness visit. Others may skip it. And so there will be times where if I'm working with somebody and I'm not going with them, or if I'm helping them make the appointment, as they make the appointment, it's important to say, and I'd like this appointment to be for my annual Medicare wellness visit. And that's a special visit that's focused on prevention, not I'm having trouble with my hip and I have this question about these medications, or I'm wondering whether it's time for a hip replacement. But, this is a once a year preventative visit that's meant to look at the big picture of everything going on with the individual. So at the time that they're making the appointment, they need to know that this is an annual wellness visit. I want this to be the visit. And I'd like there to be included a cognitive screen. As a professional, if I'm working with someone and I have a signed release ahead of time and they've shared that they have a visit coming up, after getting signed release, I talk with them about would it be okay if I write a really simple note to your doctor and explain who I am, show that I have your permission to share this information, and then just suggest that we've talked about these changes in your memory and thinking, and that you've got some concerns about your brain health, and that might be very helpful during the Medicare annual wellness visit to also get that cognitive screen. Is that okay? Would you feel comfortable with me faxing that information to your doctor ahead of time? Then sometimes the primary care physician will refer the person to see a specialist for further evaluation. And that can involve a range of individuals, and including a geriatrician, a neurologist, a neuropsychologist who does cognitive testing, a psychiatrist, a geriatric psychiatrist, or a psychologist. A lot of folks. I'll say these days, the waits for specialists, including neurologists and psychiatrists, are very, very long waits. And a geriatrician is a board-certified medical doctor, so an MD who specializes in aging. And oftentimes of this whole list in the specialists, it'll be faster to get an appointment for a geriatrician, that's just an MD who specializes in working with aging individuals, than it would be to wait for the neurologist or the psychiatrist appointment. Okay, so what will be involved then in those visits? Let me spend some time discussing what happens in a evaluation. So when individuals see their primary care physician and discuss concerns that they have in memory and thinking, they will oftentimes look at their physical health conditions. They will look at their medications. They will sometimes do some blood work to check for a number of concerns, including thyroid difficulties and so there's such a long list of conditions that can create difficulties in memory and thinking problems. And so they will do a review and they'll get that blood work back. And so they're first looking for that process of elimination of this long list of conditions that can explain what's going on and why this person is experiencing things. They'll first be reviewing things. Okay, so now we're back to the importance of an early diagnosis and some final recommendations for individuals.
In early detection of Alzheimer's, for one thing, a person is able to have a voice in what happens next. They can make plans. They can live life more on their own terms. They can also make plans for the future, financial plans, care plans. They can let people know what they want, which can be a real gift later on. It also allows time for families to make plans and to make decisions about who can do what and figure out care and those kinds of issues. Some people are interested in clinical trials. Clinical trials allow people to have access to treatments that aren't available yet. And for some people, that can be a really important thing to pursue.
So there's a lot of reasons for early detection, and we're doing a recap that we're just encouraging people to pay attention to changes in memory and thinking and behavior that you notice in people that are changes from what's been true for them before. If you see changes that are unusual, you can take action by having a conversation. And the first one is to express concern and care for the individual, to use the word brain health that we find is more less stigmatizing than other, I'm worried about your memory. And then people are like, my memory's just fine. And so you can say, you know, for all of us as we age, some things normally change, and then sometimes there are concerns that might be due to some other health condition. And things can be so complicated with our brain health. It could be related to some of your medications or some of your health conditions, or there might be a health condition that when it's diagnosed is treatable and reversible. And if that's true, we really want to find out as soon as possible. So the Alzheimer's Association has a website with a number of downloadable pieces of information that including the 10 warning signs that can be used. And then there's a number of benefits for early detection. First, to identify conditions other than a dementia that are treatable. That's the first message. We don't know what's going on in your situation, and it might be something that has a relatively simple fix. It's really important to find out if the medications that you're on are interacting together in a way that isn't good for you, or if you have a thyroid difficulty or B12 deficiency or something else that's changing the way that your brain's working. And then for individuals who do have an early stage of a neurocognitive disorder, there are benefits to early detection, including the ability for the person to be involved in planning for the future, explore treatment options, and participate in clinical trials. So we encourage people to get a diagnosis, and now we've got a little background opportunity to just sort of like test your knowledge, true, false. I'm going to go through a couple of these quickly. So currently there's currently no way to diagnose Alzheimer's disease, and if we were in a room together, I'd have you like raise your hand if you thought that that was true or false. That's false. There's a number of assessments and tests that make it quite possible for healthcare professionals to diagnose Alzheimer's with a high degree of certainty, over 90%. We're kind of in the 95% accuracy, oftentimes at very early stages. Then There's a number of possible assessments and tests, medical histories, physical exams, screens for depression, interviews with companions. There might be some laboratory tests. Sometimes there are cognitive tests from a clinical neuropsychologist. Sometimes there are some brain imaging, especially if they're trying to differentiate between Alzheimer's disease and frontotemporal dementia. And then for some individuals, they'll do a cerebral spinal fluid analysis. Do dementia-like symptoms always result in a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or another dementia? And the answer to that is resoundingly no. So here we're wrapping up with our family, the Garcias. The appointments have been going well. Mom's been handling them. Do you think it's really dementia? I guess we don't know. It could be something else. We're going to move on because of time, but in that case it was Alzheimer's. And so the diagnostic experience does vary from person to person. There could be a number of things other than Alzheimer's or another dementia that can be causing the symptoms. And the thing that we're most worried about in our society or that stigma, the misconceptions about the disease and believing that nothing can be done can really prevent people from seeking a diagnosis. And so with that in mind, we're now going to wrap up and talk about some resources for you from the Alzheimer's Association. So when the diagnosis is Alzheimer's or another form of neurocognitive disorder, we then encourage folks to contact the Alzheimer's Association. So in this text from this family, the sister saying, I called, got your voicemail, how did it go? The sister says, well, the diagnosis was early stage Alzheimer's. And the other sister said, oh no, what do we do now? She said, well, the doc said that the Alzheimer's Association offers free resources, some to help people live well with the disease. And so certainly we'd really like to encourage all of you, whether you're worried about your own memory concerns, worried about the brain health of a family or friends or the individuals in your work setting, we just want you to know that the Alzheimer's Association is there for all of you, regardless of what situation that you're in. And you're going to see this video of that the Alzheimer's Association is covered across the United States. The mission is a world without Alzheimer's and other dementias. And the 1-800 number, I'm going to say twice, slowly. 1-800-272-3900. 1-800-272-3900, or you're welcome to go to their website at alz.org. And so you'll see in the chat that Jamie and Voice has also provided that information in the chat for those of you. And with that, we are now done with our presentation. There are a variety of resources and supports, from information to care planning and referral, to support groups. There's just too many to talk about today, but we really like to encourage all of you to know that that's a resource, and we certainly have our important ways that you can participate in joining the fight, especially the Fall Walk to End Alzheimer's that's present in all of your communities. There's a variety of ways of volunteering, being involved in advocacy, participating in clinical trials, participating in the Walk to End Alzheimer's. And in June, we have the longest day, which is the longest day of the year in June, that's dedicated with programming to raise awareness of Alzheimer's disease. And so with that in mind, we are now done with our presentation. I'm going to stop the screen sharing. It was lovely to have the participants. I appreciated those who introduced themselves and asked questions, and we hope that for everyone who is on today's webinar, whether you're just looking for a little bit of information or you have a specific concern, that this provided you with enough to know what the next step is. You don't have to plan it all, you just have to know about what the next concrete step is to move along the way.